you for joining us tonight for how to make the most out of your diabetes technology. My name is Matt Point, and I am the Director of Advancement here at Children with Diabetes. Thank you so much. We have this, our Screenside chat series every month, so I welcome you to check out our website and see what's coming up next month. If this is your first time with us, you can learn more and see our upcoming schedule at cwd.is/Screenside, and don't worry, I'll drop it into the chat soon. Tonight, we are going to hear an awesome presentation from two friends of mine. I'm really excited for it, but I wanted to let you know we will be doing a Q&A period, but we're going to hold that for the end. So if throughout the presentation a question comes up and you have you want clarification on something or it made you think of something, please feel free to drop that in the chat, but please know that we will not be answering the questions until we get to the very end of the Q&A session. You can also drop your questions into the Q&A box, and you can also ask questions anonymously in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or use the Q&A, or you can send them directly to me through the Zoom chat. Once again, if you are joining us live on Facebook, this is a Zoom event. I welcome you to join us live on Zoom at cwd.is/Screenside so we can answer your questions. All right. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to two of my friends, Faith and Pantea from CHOP at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They both work in the Diabetes Center for Children there. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but thank you so much for being here tonight. We're really excited. And take it away.
Good evening. So my name is Faith Daly. I'm a CDCES at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I work in the Princeton office, and I do some work in the Philly office. And I'm one of our technology representatives, helping our patients and families and our staff learn more about diabetes technology.
Hi, I'm Pantea Minnock, and I'm a nurse practitioner at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I've worked with kids with diabetes for about 20 years, and at CHOP, I work on the inpatient side, the outpatient side, and partner pretty closely with Faith on developing our technology tools for our patients and care providers. And I think I start first, right? So thanks everybody for being with us tonight and for going Oscar night for a little while to hear about diabetes technology. Some of our objectives for today is to give you a little bit of an overview of what's out there, talk a little on strategies to get these tools and optimize these tools, and identify and give you some guidance on some of the challenges that we see in terms of using technology. I'm a big history fan, so I think the history of diabetes is really quite extraordinary, especially given that 100 years ago, really this chronic illness didn't have much of a life expectancy, and we didn't even have insulin. So back then, this is what life looked like. And then just a little bit later, there was the discovery of insulin in 1922. Thank you to Dr. Banting and Best, who were able to provide us with this life-saving medication. And this picture, I think, speaks 1,000, if you want to go one more, Faith. This picture speaks 1,000 words in terms of the miracle of insulin. That is a 3-year-old boy before insulin and just a few months after receiving insulin. So what are the hallmarks of diabetes care, and where have we seen the biggest advancements in the tools that we use today? We're going to start off with glucose monitoring. Way back in the early 1900s, there was this thing called Benedict solution that was found. And at that time, we measured glucose using urine. And then these are the kits that were used. And we fast forward to the 1960s, where we had our very first glucometer that was developed. You can see that in that corner over there, and see just quite how big it was. And at that time, nobody tested blood sugars at home. It was always in the hospital, and there was a debate on whether you should be testing at home. In the 1980s, we were able to give these tools to patients, and they were big and took a long time to get results, and they weren't really all that accurate. We measure accuracy in terms of blood sugars using a tool called the MARD, the mean absolute relative difference with what a blood sugar would be And back then it was over 20%. Today, the tools that we have, as you can see up here, much smaller, take a lot less time to get results. And the MARD is really between 8 and 9%. And quickly, the use of glucometers is changing to using glucose sensors as our standard gold tool for measuring blood sugars. And a lot of you know this is a probe that sits under the skin and measures the glucose oxidase enzyme in the subcutaneous tissue. And the way we use this is really in real time. You're able to see what the sugar is, what the trend is, where it's going, and be able to make decisions based on that. This slide really provides a good visual of how much information that we now have using a glucose sensor, because back in the day, you have those dot points, but when you fill in the dots, you can see a very different picture, much more comprehensive picture of what's going on with glycemic variability. These are the glucose sensors that are available today. These are the, we have the Libre system, the Dexcom G6, the Medtronic Guardian system. There is also for adults, this system, the Eversense, it's the first implantable sensor. And there, as you can see, the transmitter is attached to the sensor. It lasts for 90 days, and you remove the transmitter, you recharge it. You still do need to calibrate, but it does provide continuous data for 90 days. This is what we're seeing in terms of the future of glucose sensors. They're getting smaller. There's going to be less parts. So the G7 is kind of like the Libre system, where the transmitter and the sensor are all in one. I guess now the Dexcom is going to be the size of a nickel, and the Libre 3 is going to be the size of a penny. The Medtronic sensor is also going to be an all-in-one system. The Eversense sensor is going to be going from a 90-day system to a 365-day system. And the clinical trials on this device is going to include pediatrics. So we don't see much of Eversense in our practice, but we will see it hopefully with the new technology that's in clinical trials now. And when we talk about the MARD, which we talked about accuracy, which is the biggest advancement in CGM, is that all of them are down to like an 8 to 9% MARD value, which allows us to dose insulin using these tools. And then we are going to the next part.
So the second hallmark of diabetes care, insulin delivery. So we'll do a little bit of a history. In 1923, so the first commercially available insulin made by Eli Lilly, you can see the pictures there. 1924, the first insulin syringe by the company BD. So this was a glass syringe, reusable steel needle. The needle had to be sharpened. The syringe needed to be boiled to sterilize it. And you can see some of the pictures there showing what that looked like. 1960s came out with the disposable insulin syringe that we all know, urine glucose test strips, and the improvement in the purity of insulin also was a discovery in the 1960s. So a lot in 40 years, a lot has happened. We also talked briefly about smart pens. So insulin delivery is really bridging the gap between just our traditional insulin syringes, and now we're moving into traditional pens, and then our smart pens. So the InPen, we do have a good population of our patients using the InPen. It's kind of a good bridge between patients who are on injections, but want to have a little bit more technology. And then Bigfoot Unity is another smart pen that is now on the market for patients 12 and over. So we do have some patients using the InPen in our practice. This picture on the left-hand side, you're going to see this was from the 1960s, and you can see how far we've come with insulin pumps that are now being used by our patients. Quite a long way. When I've shown this picture before, I think people just don't realize, how far we've come, and you can see the devices now that are being used. So just a quick brief background on pump basics. A pump, it's a precise, flexible insulin delivery device. So it's a way to deliver that precise insulin that you can't always get from syringes and pens. And it can really help with, improving, lifestyle, physiological needs of our patients. We have patients that are diagnosed as young as, 12 months, and they really need more precise delivery. So insulin pumps, it's a continuous subcutaneous insulin infusion, also known as CSII, and you can see some of the pictures there as far as how that insulin is being delivered. So the pump, it has two different ways it delivers insulin using fast-acting insulin. So we have the basal rate, which is going to cover the body's basic metabolic needs, and then the bolus rate, which is what is being used to cover the food and correct high blood sugars. And the nice thing is we can really change the amount and type of delivery as far as the insulin. Insulin pumps on the market now that have FDA approval. So we have our traditional insulin pumps that come with tubing. You'll see the tandem t:slim X2 pump, the Medtronic 670G and 770G. And then we have our patch pumps, so pumps without tubing. So right now, Insulet has 3 different Omnipod pumps, the Eros, our classic, the Dash, and the Omnipod 5 that is currently in a limited launch. So pretty exciting for, the different options that are available for patients. And then we move into our automated insulin delivery systems, or AID systems. So we have the Medtronic 670G and 770G that uses the auto mode feature. The tandem t:slim X2 pump using basal IQ and control IQ. And then Omnipod 5 uses something called automated mode. So you'll see we have an insulin pump that communicates with a continuous glucose sensor, and there's an algorithm that helps these devices automate insulin delivery. So pretty exciting. When I started as a CDCES at CHOP, these systems were not available, and now I've really seen in the 20 years I've been there a lot of improvements and change, and it's been really amazing. I have to give a shout out to the Barbara Davis Center in Colorado. So they have this Panther program that really has tons of education resources for clinicians and for patients and families. And this slide was just helpful to show some comparisons between the Medtronic 670, 770G, their 780G pump, which is not FDA approved yet, but it is available outside the US. So that's another exciting device coming to market. The t:slim X2 with control IQ, and then we have our Omnipod 5. So some great information there to compare the different devices. When we talk about future of AID, so Beta Bionics, the iLet Bionic Pancreas. So this is pretty exciting. So they're working on their insulin-only pump and their dual hormone pump, which will use insulin and glucagon, the first of its kind. Future of Tandem, so they're working on the remote bolus feature. This did get FDA approval recently, and hopefully that will be available to patients soon. They're also looking to develop the Mobi patch pump, so another tubeless device, and then their t:slim X3. Medtronic, like I said before, has their 780G pump coming out. That's awaiting FDA approval, and then the Tidepool Loop. So this device is an AID algorithm only, so it will work with a couple different other devices, which will be able to connect those devices together. So some exciting stuff coming out in the future of AID. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Pantea now. We're going to talk about some goals of technology and the innovations that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think one of the best advancements is that these AID systems are really allowing us to enable pancreatic function. The goals of technology is really to reduce some complications. We're trying to improve glycemic control, blood sugars, and also do it in terms of improving quality of life and reducing the burden of care. So when I talk to my patients about AID technology, I think of it as, these tools, if we can help you use them, allow you to kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit, look up from the dashboard. Think about it as like the Teslas out there. If you can learn to use it and drive it correctly on the road, it'll actually help you do a lot. And in the future, a friend says it nicely, you just want to be able to set it and forget it. So hopefully we will be able to get there. One of the things that we think about a lot in terms of improving A1C or time in range is how do we measure like glycemic variability and how tightly people are controlled and how we know if they're doing okay in terms of the risk for long-term and short-term complications. So in the 1970s, the A1C was developed and there were lots of, go ahead, you can go to the next slide, please. A lot of the national and international organizations that provide guidelines for diabetes control use the A1C as a goal to give us goals to help patients reduce complications. And years and years ago, when I first started out in diabetes care, the goals were much tighter. But today we are now at a place where almost everybody agrees that the goal of A1C of 7% or lower is best. And then the American Academy of Endocrinologists for adults recommends 6.5 or lower. And as we think about A1C, we start to now look at what glucose sensors allow us to measure, which is time in range. And by this, we mean the percent of time that someone spends between 70 to 180 blood sugars. These are the guidelines that the ADA has set out. And really, when they say 70% in range, that means 17 hours a day between 70 and 180, which may seem for some to be, oh my goodness, and for others being like, oh yeah, I've got this. But what you really want to track is that every 5% increase gives you an extra 1 hour a day in time in range. And every 5% increase in time in range equates to a better A1C and can reduce your risk of long-term complications. And my goal with my patients is, let's start out with just the nighttime when you're sleeping, to sleep 10, 12 hours a day sometimes. That can be the majority of your time in range. And does it actually even matter, like time in range and A1C? So this is a back to our history lesson that the Diabetes Control and Complications trial in the 80s showed us very, very clearly that yes, diabetes control, when it's intensively managed and you have tighter blood sugar control, which at the time we were measuring it in terms of A1C, you really do see a difference in long-term complications. So this is one way of looking at the long-term complications if you're able to achieve tighter and tighter control. And this is another way of looking at this. And I like to talk to my patients using this chart because really every little bit does help, even if you go from 11 to 10%, your risk profile really changes. And with this technology, with sensors and AID, we really can get much closer to the 7 and 8% with a lot less risk of hypoglycemia than we used to in the past. One of the most important things, I think, when you start out with technology is access to these devices. And this is a little bit of like a very dear topic to my heart because I think access to therapeutics is really quite complicated in this country. And also there's a huge disparity. I think we could do a whole lecture on access, and I'll start talking about some tools that we can share with you. And then Faith will talk about utilization of these devices once you get to them. So when you talk about access, you really have to understand your insurance. It's not intuitive. It's not even for the smartest, most educated people. When you come into this world, you really learn some new verbiage and some new rules that you probably have not seen before. So understanding the difference between the pharmacy end of your insurance and the medical end of your insurance, which provides which gives you supplies to your durable medical equipment part, and knowing what needs to come from pharmacy, what needs to come from DME, and then in what cases can you get it from both so you can maximize supplies and minimize costs. You need to understand the formularies that insurances have and how they change and what changes means for you and your children, and how important some of those changes are and how much you need to be fighting them. So a lot of people want to fight Humalog versus Novolog. For 99% of the people, that change is not clinically significant. But if you're talking about the difference between sensors, you know, there is a big difference between one versus the other, especially when you are using those sensors with pumps and other like InPens and other tools. So you really want to know what the formulary is and when you and your providers need to fight for what you want. There are some ways to do cost savings to be able to get tools. So understand getting 30-day supplies versus 90-day supplies. Know about your FSA accounts, which you can set up with your employers. There are tons and tons of patient assistance programs out there, especially these days where the cost of insulin is now under the national microscope of things that we're talking about in government too. So that is something that you can turn towards. Coupons and drug cards. I know that the group chats and forums of diabetes, there's a lot of very passionate group of people who are out there to help with this. I mean, there was a time where Costco was selling transmitters, I think, for like $30. And that was really, we got wind of that through these kind of forums that are able to disseminate the information. Know how to shop for your devices. So sometimes buying things off of Amazon is cheaper than using your insurance, especially if you have high deductible plans. And other pharmacy coverage resources are like GoodRx or SingleCare.com. They can help you shop around for the cheapest place to get your supplies. So once you get your supplies, you also want to be sure to stay on top of your refill. I think some great advice is not only know what the clinical office that you're working with, how they work, like do they only do prescriptions certain days of the week, how long do they take for the turnaround of forms and prescriptions. Become friends with your pharmacist. I think anybody who's lived with diabetes knows how helpful that can be. And then use the reminder tools that all of these DMEs and pharmacies have. Sometimes they can be very overwhelming and annoying, and sometimes they really can be helpful. So apps and texts and emails and calls are a good way to stay on top of getting your supplies so you're not running out of them. Especially in the AID world, these systems really work together and communicate with each other. So one without the other is not going to give you the outcomes that you're looking for. There is a whole section of when you're trying to access these devices, you may come across denials, and there are ways to facilitate that as well. Go through an appeals process with your insurance. Many people, if you have access to your HR department, can help change the contract between the insurance and your employer, and I've seen that happen. If you're really having a hard time getting what you need between you and your provider, there are complaints that patients can complain to the ombudsman of their insurance company, and that really is somebody who is set up to help you gain the tools that you need, and they will fight for you. Same as consumer assistance programs that are available in many states to help you with your appeal. And I think lastly, there's a group of advocacy groups that can help you from a legal standpoint, and the ADA has lawyers and all that are helpful in many realms, and sometimes in the realm of getting supplies.
So once you have your either continuous glucose monitor, your insulin pump, whatever technology device, what we find is really important is initial education. So, the education and training is key when you're starting on a new device. Usually, the first things that you learn about the device is sort of what you continue to hold as what is true. So, when we talk to our patients about insulin pumps, continuous glucose monitors, smart pens, we, some of these devices are approved for self-start. So despite that, we still make sure that we are recommending that our patients meet with a CDCES for initial training. We do have an insulin pump therapy program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So we have a whole program set up for pumps. And we also have a program set up for getting education for continuous glucose monitors. So just making sure that you have realistic expectations for technology. We always make sure our patients understand, getting back to basics. So when they're going on an insulin pump, they still are back to basics on what to do if that pump fails. If there is a problem, they know how to go back to, syringes and pens. Also for continuous glucose monitors, they understand that there may be times where they still need to do some finger sticks if they're finding that their continuous glucose monitor is not accurate. So how they feel doesn't match the information that they're getting. And realizing that, again, when you have an insulin pump, you're still going to be needing to, either do a blood sugar, or look at your continuous glucose monitor. And you still need to be giving insulin for food and for blood glucose correction. So these devices are not taking the place of that basic diabetes care. And also a follow-up plan. So for patients that do meet with us for education, we always want to make sure, once they go home or once that video visit is over, that we are following up with them to make sure that that they, they're doing okay with their devices. Are they having any issues or problems? We're going to talk a lot about how to troubleshoot and problem solve some of the issues that patients are having. What have their experiences been like now that they're on this new technology device? And then, where are they getting their diabetes information? So, there's tons of places to get information. It could be friends, relatives, the internet, it could be all different places. And we want to make sure, if our patients are hearing things that just don't make sense to them, that they just don't understand, they're kind of questioning it, that we always make sure that they come back to their team at CHOP so they can, find out if the information that they're getting is accurate. So education resources that hopefully you all have access to. So of course, your diabetes healthcare provider, a certified diabetes education and care specialist, manufacturer resources. So, all of the companies have great resources available on their websites, their clinical teams that have available to talk to. 24-hour tech support, really important. We have patients, maybe they're just starting on a continuous glucose monitor, and during our training, we run into technical problems. And we're getting on the phone with the patient during appointments sometimes, talking to tech support. And I think it's a really great education opportunity for the patients to see, hey, I can do this. If I go home and there's a problem, I know now how to contact tech support. And sometimes that's one of the most important things for patients and families to understand. And of course, our diabetes organizations, Children with Diabetes, ADA, JDRF, and the College Diabetes Network. So these are great organizations that patients can utilize their resources. And then we talk about data review. So, once you're on that device, those devices really capture a lot of data, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So, we talk about why is it even important to review the data that you're now getting. And Pantea talked about, improving time and range and, being able to see, if I'm looking at just the overnight time frame, I think that's great to just start with chunks of time and, hey, let's look at the overnight and what is going on. And am I seeing my numbers, am I trending higher than normal? Am I trending lower than normal? Finding a time to review data. So, if it's just every Sunday evening for 5 minutes, we're going to sit down and look at that data. How does my data get uploaded? So, The nice thing is technology over time is trying to make this all automated. So, the gone are the days of having to always find that cord and plug it in and try to upload your devices manually. There are some devices that still is the case. And some patients who, for patients who don't always have compatible computers and things like that, having that auto upload feature for their continuous glucose data and their insulin pump can be really helpful, and using those connected apps to be able to do that. That also helps providers, so Pantea and myself and our team at CHOP, be able to see data in between appointments when patients are reaching out to us, which is really helpful. So where can you go to review CGM data? So Dexcom Clarity, Medtronic CareLink, LibreView. So these are the reports that we're reviewing with patients in between appointments, during appointments, and when they come back in for follow-up for education after they've started their devices. We also are teaching patients how to look at these reports and share that data with us. For the pump data, we're looking at Gluco, we're looking at Tandem T-Connect, and Medtronic CareLink as well. So I'm going to shoot this over to Pantea. She's going to start talking about some tips and tricks for utilization.
We're going to start out with using our sensors, and I think there are multiple components of things to think about to make sure that you're optimizing the use of your glucose sensor. Tissue health and hydration are really important, making sure that you're choosing sites that are not damaged, that are not prone to movement or whatever the activity of the day or activity of the season for our athletes are. Making sure that you are using the alarms that each of these systems have in a way that works best for your family, and that changes year to year, and as kids are growing and changing, and making sure that whatever you need at that time is what the alarm is able to help you accomplish. There is this idea of appropriate time to calibrate, which is becoming less and less of an issue as the technology becomes more advanced and accurate. But we want to make sure that we're not calibrating at times of big blood sugar variation, so not right after a meal or not right after you've been running and finished running. And working with your team or your support system to really understand the system in terms of how it actually works. So the first time that you are woken up in the middle of the night with a very low blood sugar, you have an understanding of, is this a compression low? Meaning, with a compression low, the sensor is pressed into the skin. So the blood flow to that area is less, meaning the glucose oxidase enzyme, which the sensor is picking up on, is not as accurate. So this is one of the most common reasons that people have lows overnight, is they're just pressing down or rolling over on their sensor, and it can cause a lot of disruption in the middle of the night until you start to understand what is happening and find the right place to place the sensors so that you have less and less of this as an issue. Understanding that sensors improve over time. What that means is the first couple of days that the sensor is living under the skin, what we call the wetting period, is giving the sensor a chance to get to understand your body, get to live in that space and become accustomed to what the enzymes are firing and how it's picking up that information. So first 24 to 48 hours of the sensor are not nearly as accurate as the last few days on the sensor. And then making sure that you see what device errors are coming up and knowing the tools on how to troubleshoot those errors. You can work with your CDE team, your clinical team, and also work with the customer service at each of the device companies for that. At CHOP, we have developed this tips and tricks for successful CGM use, which is kind of a summary of what I was just saying and kind of what Faith had alluded to. So getting trained by a professional is really important. Right now, a lot of these devices have modules and videos that you can do online and start the sensors or even pumps, but really to understand tips and tricks, you want to talk to a professional who's done it. And for kids, you really want to work with a pediatric provider, because there are some nuances with that population that may be different than adults. So get trained by a CDE, know your technology, which is some of the things that we had talked about. Works better the longer you wear it. Make sure that you keep your receiver close so that it improves data transmission. Learn to manage the alerts and alarms on your phone so that it is working for you and not causing problems and stress and anxiety. Understand that the CGM apps can impact the function and speed on the mobile device so that you're seeing this information, and choose the right phones or iPads, Apple Watches that are going to be best for you. There's still a lot of Wi-Fi connection issues that we'll talk about later, but that can interrupt glucose reading. So it's good to understand that information, and knowing how to use the apps in terms of not losing data, or when you're sharing, not losing the person who's sharing with you, not losing that data. And use alerts and alarms wisely, which we talked about a little bit. Next slide. And then trying to minimize site problems, which we'll talk about later as well, but tissue health is one of the key deterrents to keeping these technologies on, and we know these technologies are really the best way to improve diabetes control. So making sure that you're using healthy tissues, you're keeping the tissue hydrated and moisturized, and if there's rashes, starting out with hydrocortisone cream and escalating as needed to something that will help reduce inflammation. Knowing how to use the antihistamine sprays that we use to lower on-site inflammation. Using barriers and reinforcers are also really helpful in making sure that you can keep the sensor on and have it do what you need to for you.
So tips and tricks for the insulin pump. So of course, similar to CGM, choosing ideal sites. A lot of our patients, depending on what sport they're in, they're always coming to us, hey, wrestling season's starting, or I'm going on a ski trip. Where should I put my pump site so it's going to stay in? Rotating sites, of course, really important. A lot of times when our patients start to put in their own sites, they sometimes always go to the same exact spot. So we make sure that we talk through with them, all over where they could try different spots. Strategies for wearing the pump. So, our patients do a saline start week where they really learn, and experience wearing the pump at night, during the school day, all different kinds of things, setting pump alerts and reminders appropriately. So it's rare that we're turning on every pump alert and reminder in the beginning. We kind of wait a little bit and let them get used to the technology before we start to talk more about a lot of the reminders. Learning to use the special features. So, the extended bolus feature, temp basal rates, using that weekday schedule. So some of our kids and our teenagers and young adults, their weekdays look very different than a weekend. So just kind of, again, these advanced features that over time can be really helpful for our patients. And then we move into our AID insulin pump. So of course, with our AID systems, the pump and the CGM really need to be in good communication. So we talk about line of sight. So making sure that their pump and their CGM, they're kind of near each other. And if they're finding that the communication is not happening, they're having signal loss, that we just sort of walk them through, how to make that pump and that CGM be a little bit closer. So the pump itself and the transmitter from the CGM need to be close by. For the t:slim X2 pump, facing that screen outward, so making sure that will optimize communication. Also, again, we talked about reviewing reports before, but again, really important with the AID systems, because now what we're able to see is not only with the patient, how the patient's interacting with their pump, but how the pump is actually trying to improve that time of range. So how is that basal, when is that basal insulin increasing, decreasing? When is it actually suspending? For the T-Slim pump with the auto corrections, when are auto corrections happening? It can be really challenging to make changes to insulin pump settings when you don't actually have reports, because sometimes it could be just behavioral changes that need to happen, and sometimes it truly is the insulin pump settings, but it's hard to see when you don't have the data to really dive into what's going on. And that will help, with those auto uploads. Again, we talk about that again, really helping that that happen so you can stay in touch with your clinical team. Of course, having a safety plan. So again, technology is great, but when that technology fails, we've had patients where they're on vacation in Florida, their insulin pump breaks, and they're on the phone with the pump company, making sure that they have backup supplies and they know who to call and when to call if they do need those backup supplies or they need help going back to injections. Just a couple things for the Medtronic 670 and 770G pumps. We talk about auto mode, and so really important with calibrations. So for that system, for these systems, calibrating 3 to 4 times a day when that glucose is steady. So when your glucose is not moving and you're just, steady before meals, when you wake up in the morning fasting, because you can throw off the accuracy of your device if you are calibrating at times when your glucose is moving, rising or falling too quickly. We talk about that pre-meal bolusing. So bolusing, that 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time, and giving insulin before you eat, every time you eat. Minimizing grazing is also something that can be helpful. For the T-Slim X2 pump with Control IQ. So again, we still emphasize that pre-meal bolusing. We'll talk a little bit about what to do if you forget to bolus. You're bolusing mid-meal, after the meal. For all of these AID systems, it actually is really important to suspend the pump when we're disconnecting. Your pump doesn't know when you're getting insulin, and when you're not, it just assumes if the pump is not suspended, you're getting insulin. So if you don't suspend your pump when you're disconnecting, and your pump is saying there's insulin on board when truly there is not, that can upset some things. Using that calculator feature of your pump, again, your pump is only as smart as the information you give it. So if you're going in and just, giving manual boluses, so, telling your pump, here's 5 units, I'm giving myself another 5 units, versus putting in the carb amount, putting in the blood sugar. For Control IQ, the great thing is that Dexcom reading pre-populates in the bolus calculator. So one less step that patients have to do. And we do tell our patients, if you do forget to bolus, it's going to happen. If you've eaten and it's less than 45 minutes ago, you can still give insulin for the carbs that you ate. One thing that we just caution our patients with the T-Slim X2 pump is often what we're seeing is if patients do bolus late, their pump probably already ramped up basal, gave that auto correction. And so we are emphasizing, looking at the pump history if they can, to see, did I get an auto correction already? Because that will impact what they end up needing to do for carb coverage. For the correction factor, so if they've eaten more than 45 minutes ago, at that point, it's like you might as well just, correct that high blood sugar that was the result of the bolus that you forgot. The other thing that we're noticing with patients is they need to be a little bit more conservative when they're treating highs and when they're treating lows. So, we have that, safety skills rule of when my blood sugar goes less than 70, I'm going to do 15 fast acting carbs. And so we're finding that because the pump most likely has already decreased basal, has suspended insulin, that they need to treat with less carbs than they're typically used to. So if they used to treat with 15, we're telling patients maybe only 8 or 10. And also patients kind of not overcorrecting. So some patients, when they're seeing their numbers high and they're not seeing the number coming down, they're doing something that I've heard patients say, rage bolusing. So not being patient and letting their insulin do the job that it's supposed to. Insulin Omnipod 5. So we're starting to learn a little bit more about this system. Again, some of the pros that we're finding with this system: simplicity, first artificial intelligence, algorithm is in the pod, which is incredible. So now we have patients who, if they're going to be swimming, they're showering, they're exercising, For Omnipod 5, the algorithm's in the pod, which is connected to the body all the time. So they are going to continue to get the benefit of the automated insulin delivery, even if their PDM or that controller is not close by. So they're never sort of disconnecting and then getting out of that automation mode. Also with Omnipod 5, it will have an app that is used to control the system if you have a compatible smartphone device. The target is now adjustable. So for some of our other AID systems, the target is one target. Now we have an adjustable target. And it also has a smart bolus calculator feature, which can be used in both the manual mode and in the automated mode, which is great. It will factor in the current Dexcom reading, but also the trend arrow when it's giving a bolus recommendation. A couple cons with this system. So a smartphone device is still needed to start and stop your Dexcom G6 via the G6 app. And those CGM alarms and alerts are coming through that G6 app as well. So we have to make sure that our patients are still using that G6 app. This picture, I love this picture. This was from Medtronic. And really, this is showing us, the top picture is showing us when you have a pump where you're programming those basal rates and your pump is delivering those basal rates day after day, night after night. Your days and your nights are not always looking the same. So we're finding that you can do the same thing one day to the next, and the outcomes you see with your glucose readings and your insulin needs are going to look very different. So we're finding that these systems now, you're almost retrospectively looking back to see, are my basal rates really doing what they need to do, and doing those basal testing where you're evaluating, is my basal rate keeping me steady overnight or during the day? Where our AID systems, looking at the bottom picture, they are acting more like your pancreas would do if it could. So it's really your insulin needs are more matching what your glucoses are. And that insulin is adjusting every 5 minutes. And it's going to look different day after day. You're not going to see the same amount of insulin being given at the same time of day. It's going to look very different and matching more what you need. It's also really important for your pumps to know what settings can I adjust. So with Medtronic, with Tandem, with Omnipod, those settings that are adjustable are very different. And so you need to know that in order to look to understand what you're going to be evaluating over time. We also jump into exercise. So each of the pumps on the market do have a little bit different way. The general concept's the same, but they have different modes that you can use. So Medtronic has that temp target, where you can up that target to 150. The nice thing about that is you can set a duration. So you kind of set that time frame, and it'll end the temp target at the end of the duration, but you can also cancel it if your activity changes. T-Slim has exercise mode, where it's trying to keep you to a higher target range. We do tell our patients, when you're wearing your pump during your exercise, because of that auto correction feature, when your glucose is going higher, it may be a good idea to give just a 0.1 bolus before you exercise. So, your pump won't give you an auto correction for that first hour of exercise, which may sort of bring your number back down when you don't want it to be. And then Omnipod 5 will also have something called the activity feature, which will also help with trying to keep your number more in range when you're exercising. We still go back to those temporary basal rates. So sometimes you're going to need to turn off AID to be able to use temp basals, but some patients find they've worked really well. And then alternate basal profiles. So again, maybe setting an exercise profile, setting a weekend profile. And then T-Slim does have another option called sleep mode. So we typically set up a sleep schedule with our patients. So they set it up. It turns on every night at a certain time, turns off in the morning. They don't need to remember. We have sort of told our patients that, if you're noticing you're rising after you fall asleep, hey, turn it on, let it start a little bit later so you still can get the advantage of those auto corrections after you go to sleep. So there's all kinds of ways that we work with our patients to help improve time and range. And then knowing that insulin needs are going to change over time. Sometimes you have these times of insulin sensitivity where you're finding, oh my gosh, I'm going low all the time. I need to back off on my doses, versus times of resistance. And, you think about how much extra work are you doing to keep those numbers in range? And these AID systems are really trying to help, take some of the burden off of our patients and families. Season changes. So when we're going into the summer season, the fall, the school year, going into winter, activities are going to change. So just making sure patients are thinking about, what am I doing during the spring season as far as activity? Times of rapid growth. So, as kids grow and as they, and sometimes, their insulin needs definitely are going to increase during those times of rapid growth, especially during puberty. We're really seeing those insulin needs go higher. And so families understanding that is going to happen. There's nothing that they're doing wrong when they see those glucose readings trending up. And then times of illness. So, definitely we see changes in insulin needs during times of illness. And sometimes even after the illness, we see that happen and linger a little bit. So I'm going to jump it back to Pantea for some technology challenges that we'll continue to talk through.
We talked already about some of the tools about choosing the sites and to prevent some of the skin reactions that we're seeing. And I think the biggest deterrent to continuously using these devices is the reactions that we're seeing more and more of, to the point that I almost think we need to partner up with dermatology to try to prevent or throw some bigger tools at some of the challenges that are happening here. But site selection, rotation, promoting tissue health, there's lots of resources, and we'll share that throughout this presentation on the tools to prevent and treat. And then most importantly, knowing when to contact your healthcare team, whether it's your endocrinologist or your primary care. There are infections that you're just not going to be able to treat at home. And so if it's hot and there's heat to the touch, if there's pus or blisters, and if you have a fever, that is definitely something that needs to be treated with an oral or a topical antibiotic that needs to be prescribed. So please know when to do that. Again, a shout out to our Colorado friends for their very comprehensive tool for skin solutions and tips. Dexcom also has some very good resources to help. We have if you look these two sites up, we have a list of barriers and adhesives and other tips on how to take care of your infusion sites and your sensor sites.
So we start to talk a little bit about device and alarm fatigue. So again, I talked in the beginning where we try not to turn too many alarms on in the very beginning. We kind of widen the alarm. So, not putting your high alert at 200 when a lot of your meals you're starting at a 150. So just making sure that we're setting those goals and expectations realistically with families. Too much info. So in the beginning, we try to tell families, everything that you're going to now see now that your child or teenager or young adult is on a continuous glucose monitor, this was happening all along. You just didn't have access to it. So still paying attention to where am I pre-meal, where am I 3 hours later, and not reacting too quickly. So we try and help ahead of time, just talk about when should I really be looking at my Dexcom. Recommendations. So, sometimes over time we say, we're just going to turn off all the high alarms right now. A lot of our kids who are in school don't want to be alerted all day, when they're in class. So it may be that during the school day, we're going to turn those high alarms off. But then once you're home, we set schedules for some of the devices where we can say, we'll turn those high alarms back on. And again, adjusting and personalizing the alerts to really what's going to work for that patient. Sometimes we have patients who they've been on a pump for months. Sometimes they've been on pump for years, and they just say, I need a break. I want to go back to injections. And that is okay. Sometimes they're taking advantage of going on a smart pen. So they're still getting that calculator feature. They're getting the logging feature, but they are not connected to something all the time. Same thing with continuous glucose monitors. So sometimes patients just want a break. And so we might say, hey, put the device on a few weeks before you're coming back in to see us. Put it on the first 2 weeks that you're back in school. Put it on, if you're finding that you're trending high, you're trending low, and you just want to get a better handle on where do I need to make adjustments. So taking those device holidays really can be helpful. And then we talk about communication, again, between devices and the apps. So, making sure that if you're having connection issues, that you're reaching out either to your healthcare provider or reaching out to Dexcom, reaching out to Medtronic, tandem tech support. Sometimes it could just be issues with Wi-Fi. Maybe you have too many things that are competing for Bluetooth. Sometimes we have patients who they have their iOS updates happening automatically, and then they find out, oh, my app's not compatible anymore. And so, just being aware that that does have an impact. Again, we talked about insulin pump and CGM communication, those CGM connected apps. So, we try to set up those apps with families when they come in for their education trainings. And then insulin pump connected apps. So again, setting up that T-Connect mobile app, setting up the Medtronic MiniMed mobile app, and then Omnipod display and view apps. So, that those apps are up and running. Again, then we talk about communication. So data sharing. So what information is being shared with parents, caregivers, their clinical team. The whole reason a lot of patients go on CGM is for safety, being able to get alerted in the middle of the night if their child's blood sugar is going low. Independence. So we have a good portion of our kids that, they've never been to a sleepover before. They never have been over to stay over at their grandparents' house. And now that their parents have a way, or their caregivers have a way to see their glucose readings when they're not physically with them, this can really help kids gain a little bit more independence, and teenagers as well. Being able to identify glucose trends and seeing, oh yeah, every time I eat this food or every time I have soccer practice, I'm dropping low overnight. So being able to pick up on those trends. And then, of course, we talk about frustration over access to data. Sometimes our patients are just feeling judged because others can see everything that is going on with their glucose readings. And also, jumping to conclusions over what the data is showing. So patients saying, I'm going high, but I just ate, and they're, my parents are assuming I didn't bolus. So, having instant access to glucose data can sometimes be a little bit frustrating. So we talk about recommendations. So understanding the connectivity challenges, knowing when to update your apps, setting developmentally appropriate expectations. So for your school-age child, your teenagers, your young adults. Again, adjusting alerts in the follow-up. So sometimes I'll say, for our families and our parents that are following their patients, maybe you're not going to get alerted as soon as your teenager goes high. Maybe you get alerted if they're high for an hour. So we're giving them the benefit of the doubt that, okay, I'm gonna see if they respond to their high alert, and if they've stayed there for an hour, that's when I will check in. And working together to set realistic goals. So again, you're not going to go from 40% in range to 70% in range overnight. So as Pantea said, like making those little 5% increase in time in range can make big impacts. And again, setting up a time to review, check in, and talk about accountability.
One of the biggest challenges to using our technology or living with chronic illness in general is the physical and emotional toll that it takes, and that's really diabetes burnout. The last 2 years have certainly not helped burnout for anybody. Our COVID pandemic has really become a mental health crisis. I can tell you that as a clinician at our hospital, I work on the inpatient side, and we have been to the mental health unit so many more times than we've been to our COVID unit, or even our ICUs where our COVID patients have been being admitted. It's just, it really is. It's been a mental health crisis these last couple of years, especially for our teens and tweens. I've seen the highest rate of anxiety and depression, and unfortunately suicide ideation, than I have in my 20 years in practice. I sent more kids to the emergency rooms I ever have before. So that adds to the toll of just the regular routine of chronic illness. So what is diabetes burnout? It's when you're tired of daily care routines. A lot of it leads to physical and mental exhaustion. You don't want to be attached to anything. You don't want to be doing the things that is required to do day in and day out. We are lucky that we have a lot of social workers and a dedicated team psychologist on our team, on our practice, to help navigate our families through diabetes burnout. And some of our recommendations are talk to your team, ask for help with daily routines. Our teenagers usually have a pretty hard time doing that, but once we can negotiate something that we can take off their plate, it really does help. As Faith had mentioned, consider a device vacation. Sometimes just that holiday gives you the motivation to want to restart again. Joining support groups and networking with others that live with type 1 is really helpful. So something like Children with Diabetes and Diabetes Camp, if you've ever been, is very helpful. And therapy is something that should be offered to everybody, especially when they get to that place. This is some of the resources for diabetes burnout. Don Huebner writes a series of books for children and tweens that can help with a lot of these kind of mental health challenges that come up in those years that can or cannot be exacerbated through diabetes burnout. Worry Wise Kids as well has some really good tools. Children with Diabetes recently did a video vault and an article on this topic. And for anybody that is interested, there is an upcoming diabetes and mental health conference in May that you can sign up for. It's an online conference that you can attend. Wanted to share as one of the resources, one of my wellness tips that I've used more often than ever these last year and a half or so. So consider that, the 6 best doctors are some of the things that we really just want to try to incorporate daily into our lives. So getting outside and getting fresh air every day, staying hydrated, getting a good night's sleep, having the right diet. The diet can not meaning in terms of losing weight, but eating healthy food so that your body has a healthy energy and that helps your mind body really function optimally. And then mindfulness, which is also really important in terms of yoga and meditation, can help get you out of those tough places, those dark places, and get you recharged if you are in burnout.
So we have additional resources here. So several websites, several podcasts. So a lot of our diabetes educators, on our drive into work, if, you're going for a walk in the neighborhood, these are great podcasts to listen to. Also, we have the YouTube and social media, the Nerdabetic. So there's some great resources out there, some of them with some humor, some of them with some really great information to share for patients and families. Of course, we also have some additional blogs there that you can see, and then several books as well that we recommend to our patients, as far as anything from the bright spots and landmines to the Diabetes Athlete's Handbook, Think Like a Pancreas. So you may have heard of some of these, but these are some great resources as well.
Okay, so we went over a little bit. I'm sorry, Matt. We had a lot that we wanted to share with you guys, but if you're still on and if you have questions, please fire away.
Well, first, I want to say that it was very much worth going over for. Thank you so much. Definitely very informative. We have received a couple of questions. This presentation will live on CWD's YouTube channel at youtube.com/CWDiabetes. You'll also be able to find it on our website on our Screenside chat page at cwd.is/Screenside. So just an FYI, we'll have them uploaded by the end of the week, most likely. So you can definitely check it out there. So if you wanted to rewatch or you joined us late. So we do have a few questions. One of them I wanted to ask real quick, is there an app to track your blood sugar / grams of carbs or dosage? We are new to T1D and are still using a paper book. Even made one ourselves to cover these 3 categories 4 times a day. Thanks.
So, Pantea, I don't know if you want me to take this question. We do have an app some of our patients use called My Sugar, MYSUGR. There are also some apps that work with your blood glucose meter. I'm not sure which blood glucose meter you're using, but OneTouch has the OneTouch Reveal app. So there's a couple different ones. SugarMate is another app out there. Pantea, do you have any other apps that you've given patients?
You know what? I would have to log into my the EMR system to look at it. Off the top of my head, I was going to just say the My Sugar app was what I was thinking originally.
Awesome. Thank you. Another good question that came in, as an adult, with as an adult, a lot of endo offices don't have CDEs. Is there any way to connect with one outside of your endo's office, but still within your insurance?
Yes, you should be able to do that. Your endocrinologist should be able to give you those resources. If they cannot, I'm thinking probably there's the accrediting agency for the CDCESs, and you probably can find on the website local diabetes educators in your area. I don't have that website.
Same with the ADA. Yeah, the ADA would also have the American Diabetes Association.
Should be able to help, find local
with that. Yeah.
certified diabetes educators in your area.
Awesome. How do you recommend someone? There's like a lot of things to pick from. I can get the Omnipod, or I can get a T-Slim. How do I know which one I should pick?
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I think a lot of what Faith talked about was working with your team and getting the education that you need at each step of getting the devices. So at CHOP, what we do is we have a 2-hour pre-tech class that our CDEs do with our patients, where they kind of go over what the features of each device is and kind of talk to the families in terms of like, all right, is your kid a swimmer? Is your kid a pianist? Is your kid, you talk about like what they do daily and what features that they're looking for. It's a little bit like car shopping. So you kind of have to put the time in to understand it. So they kind of get access to seeing the devices, and then they tell them to call the rep to get some more information. And I've found that these blogs have a lot of really good forums, like devoted to like T-Slim users or Omnipod users. And if you want to spend some time looking at those, you can get a sense of like, my 4 to 6-year-old does well with this. What can I get help with here?
Awesome. Thank you. And to comment a little bit more on that, if you are interested in meeting some of those reps, you can meet the majority of them at Children with Diabetes Friends for Life conference, specifically Friends for Life Orlando this July at Disney World. So if you're interested in joining us, rooms are filling up quickly. You can learn more at cwd.is/Orlando. Another good question just popped in here. In your experience, have you seen an improvement in A1C with the increased use of CGM and pumps over the past couple of years? What is the target
Absolutely.
you generally look to achieve with your patient, understanding that it may vary? A1C targets, that is.
Yeah. So I think we've seen it in practice, and the literature really supports that if you can get patients to use these tools, they are definitely going to achieve better glycemic control. Right now, we've changed, I can't remember exactly, 3-4 years ago, Faith, that we adopted the ISPAD rules, the ISPAD guidelines that the A1C goal should be 7% or lower. If you're an adult, the American Endocrinology Group recommends 6.5% or lower. Much lower than that, you get into much higher rates of hypoglycemia and the chance of, and it doesn't really make a big difference in terms of long-term complications, but it does increase your rate of short-term complications, right? Specifically hypoglycemia. So if you can get people to use the CGM and pumps, you are definitely going to see a better outcome. But there's a whole host of reasons why people may not be able to use them. Access, one of those issues. And I don't know, Faith, do you have any more you want to add to that?
No, I mean, you covered it. We've seen patients, I think we've seen with the AID systems, it's amazing the improvement in time of range we've seen in the overnight hours. And patients will come back to us weeks later, months later, and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I'm getting a good night's sleep finally. And that's a third of your day. If a third of your day you're consistently in range, that is going to improve, of course, your time in range and your A1C. So I just second what Pantea said. We've seen great improvements with our technology.
Awesome. Well, I think that is it for our questions tonight. So I want to thank you both again for joining us tonight for CWD Screenside Chat. You were amazing, and I can't wait to have you back on a future program. But do you have any, do you have like a last word of wisdom each that you'd like to share?
I think what I always say with the technology is really try to let go of a little bit of the control and allow it to do its thing. I think one of the places that you can get lost is, especially the people that are used to really being on top of things, to be able to achieve the goals that they've been able to achieve, is kind of like stepping back has been a little bit hard for some people. So I think let it do its thing, because it really is the systems are smart, the algorithms are smart, and they can help you.
Yeah, and I would just add, one day at a time, take it one day at a time. Small little changes can make a big, big difference. So, as a diabetes educator, we talk a lot about behavior goals, and we try to make these goals realistic. Like if patients are, if we're coming up with a goal, we make sure that it's, something that they just one small change, like, hey, you know what? I'm going to start pre-meal bolusing at breakfast. I'm not really doing it much at all, but I'm going to start with one meal a day, so one day at a time, and really, small little changes can make a big difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again for being here with us tonight. And thank you for joining us both on Facebook and here on Zoom. If you'd like to rewatch this video, it'll be on CWD's YouTube channel later this week, as well as on CWD's Screenside Chat website at cwd.is/Screenside Chat, where you can also see our upcoming and future programs. You can also see more, especially our in-person events, at cwd.is/community. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.